Before we get started with today's video, I'd just like to say thank you to whoever sent my previous video to the BBC. I had suggested an RTD and Stephen Moffat hybrid as the best choice for showrunner, but I guess Stephen Moffat said no to that. Thank you anyway, BBC, and please continue to look to me in my videos when making important decisions regarding the future of the show. Anyway, on with the video. In the episode Extremis, it turns out at the end that the entire thing was a simulation made by the monks and not the real Doctor, but it builds off the previous episode and includes 12, the one in Extremis, Missy, Nardole, and Bill, who were all introduced earlier, so what if maybe every episode before Extremis is canon to Extremis, and so every episode before Extremis takes place in the Extremis simulation, and so the end of Extremis is the first time we actually ever see the real universe, and the episode after Extremis is the first time we ever see the real Doctor and Bill and Nardole, and everything before that, including audios and everything, happens in the Extremis simulation, but not in the real non-Extremis universe. This would explain things like the first Doctor, non-Extremis, looking the same in the last episode with that Doctor who was an Extremis, and how the Timeless Child, also non-Extremis, thing works in the Fugitive Doctor, non-Extremis, works because the Extremis universe simulation isn't the same as the real universe, and so things established in episodes or audios or stuff set in the Extremis universe isn't necessarily canon to the real universe, and so technically Bill and Nardole are the first canonical companions we ever actually saw, first appearing in the episode after Extremis. And so the one most people think is the first episode of Doctor Who ever, Rose, is actually not the first canonical episode, because the first canonical episode is the ending of Extremis, making Extremis the real first episode of the show, and Stephen Moffat, non-Extremis, the creator of it, and Peter Capaldi, in Extremis, the first real Doctor, and since the one with a bunch of doctors choosing not to commit genocide, not Extremis, and the one with the spooky statues, not Extremis, and the one with the wall punching, not Extremis, aren't really canon, and so that means Extremis is obviously then the best episode of the show, because nothing after Extremis has been anywhere close to as good as Extremis, and I'm not saying that because I'm an Extremis extremist or anything, I'm saying that because everyone who's ever seen Extremis would agree Extremis is the best episode ever, since all the other ones before it are non-canonical to the non-Extremis universe, and non-canonical episodes cannot be the best because that's stupid. And so that's why Timeless Child, not an Extremis, is actually a great idea, because it shows us all the actual real Doctors who weren't in Extremis before the one from Extremis, and the one after the one from Extremis, and the one in the last episode with the one from Extremis, and the one fugitive one who's also not in Extremis, with the one who is the one after the one from Extremis, Capaldi, and also that means that the first time the Cybermen, non-Extremis, or Gallifrey, non-Extremis, ever appeared was in Series 12. Extremis is not in the series. And the same with Jack Harkness, who's not an Extremis, from Torchwood, which doesn't include Extremis, and the Absorbaloff, who's in the flashback in the Timeless Child episode, which isn't Extremis. And so the Chibnall era, which doesn't include Extremis, can't be bad or ruin anything from earlier, because it introduced all these things from non-canonical episodes into the canonical non-Extremis universe. The one, not the one from Extremis, the one I think we should call the canon verse. And so that's why Extremis is the best episode ever, and David Bradley, not an Extremis, is the real first Doctor, even though he's not an Extremis, and the Timeless Child, which isn't an Extremis, is awesome, and Series 10, the series with Extremis in it, is the first one to have anything be canon, and Wilf, who isn't an Extremis, is not canonical, and those stupid audios, which don't talk about Extremis, aren't canonical, and the Pating, which is non-Extremis, and the Absorbaloff, non-Extremis, are two of the only canonical villains ever, even though they're not in Extremis, and Moffat, who's not an Extremis, is the first showrunner because he showran Extremis, and Chibnall, who isn't an Extremis either, is awesome and a genius, and Extremis is the best episode ever, and why we should start renumbering episodes based off of when they fit in relation to Extremis, with the one right before Extremis being episode BE1, before Extremis 1, and the episode after Extremis being AE1, after Extremis 1, and Extremis being episode 0. And so Revolution of the Daleks is actually episode AE30, after Extremis 30. And so there are really only 31 canonical episodes, one of which being Extremis, in the canon verse, and everything else before that is in the non-canonical pre-Extremis verse. And it's also why I'm a bigger genius than Moffat, who isn't an Extremis, or Chibnall, who isn't an Extremis, because I figured it all out, even though I'm not an Extremis either. And it's also why it's essential that you don't forget to subscribe to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel.